So far, the Financial Services Royal Commission has been ugly for Australia's big four banks, and already evidence of shady practices in the banking business is creating community demand for banks to operate ethically and honestly. A consortium backed by Judo Capital has seized on this trust deficit, raising $100 million to form a breakaway bank to focus on the small to medium sector. One of the co-founders is Joseph Healy, a former top executive from the National Australia Bank. He's speaking with our senior business correspondent, Peter Ryan.
Over the process of the last decade or so, there's been a cultural shift in the major banks, a fixation on selling products and pushing a sales culture, a fixation on residential property-based lending. And whilst the banks continue to be hugely profitable, their customers have become increasingly dissatisfied with the service that they've been receiving from the banks.
Is it fair enough to say that the big players have lost touch with small to medium business?
I think all of the evidence emphatically says that to be the case, unfortunately. The skills that once defined relationship bankers that work closely with small businesses have largely been lost. And I think there has over time progressively been a disconnect between what the customer wants and what the banks are offering.
The Financial Services Royal Commission is well underway, and it's been quite ugly for the big four. How difficult is it going to be for them to restore trust with the community?
I think it's a major challenge. In many ways, they are locked in a path-dependent course, and it's very difficult when you're such big institutions that have formed habits over a number of years to change that course and address some of the societal disquiet and particularly rebuild trust. So I think it's a very challenging thing for the big banks to do, something clearly that they have to do, because major banks in this country and elsewhere operate under a social license, and that social license can be reviewed and changed. In fact, the Royal Commission in many ways is a review of the social license that the major banks have. But I think I would not underestimate the size of the challenge in adjusting and adapting and changing a culture that is pretty much set in concrete.
At the end of the Royal Commission, and the final report is due in February next year, we're likely to see tougher regulation on the banks, but could that actually lead to a breakup of the banks and effectively become competitors to what you're trying to set up?
The issues that are emerging from the Royal Commission are largely reflective of an industry structure that lacks meaningful competition. When there is real competition, then people have to behave and conduct themselves in a way that addresses that competitive pressure. Where there's an absence of real competition, then you get conduct and behaviour that is not in the interests of the customers or society.
So you're starting up a bank from scratch. You've raised $100 million and you've applied for a banking licence from the banking regulator APRA. So you have a pretty big to-do list. But what are the things that you won't be doing or making sure you avoid?
We are positioning this bank on a foundation of trust. A much used word, but banking essentially is all about trust. And everything that we will do will be to ensure that we live up to the promise of being a trusted provider of finance to small to mid-sized businesses. And we'll be particularly vigilant to ensure some of the cultural features that you see in the major banks that have destroyed trust, that they don't infiltrate the culture that we're developing at Judo.
So in rebuilding that trust, you won't be using things like sales commissions, some of the problems that we've seen come up in the Royal Commission in terms of brokers?
Most certainly we will not be using sales commission. Our people will not have sales targets. We won't think about products. We'll be thinking about customers and what their needs are. But sales and that sales language and a sales culture will not be part of the way that we think, talk and act.
Joseph Healy, Chief Executive of Judo Capital, with senior business correspondent Peter Ryan.